"You don't want to play this game with me, old man." The words, sharp and dripping with disdain, sliced through the placid afternoon air. Officer Caitlin Miller stood with one hand on her hip, the other resting casually, almost lazily, near the holstered firearm on her belt. Her mirrored sunglasses threw back a distorted reflection of the man she was addressing, an old biker, weathered and still, sitting astride a Harley-Davidson that looked as ancient and storied as he did. The man, Silas Blackwood, didn't flinch. At 82 years old, he had learned the virtue of stillness. His hands, gnarled with age but steady as stone, remained on the handlebars. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, were fixed on some distant point over the officer's shoulder as if watching a memory only he could see. "Sir, I'm talking to you," Miller pressed, her voice rising in impatience. Her partner, a younger, less confident officer named Davis, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze flickering between Miller and the small crowd that was beginning to gather on the sidewalk. "License and registration." Now, Silas moved with a slow, deliberate grace that Miller clearly mistook for defiance. He reached into the pocket of his worn leather vest, the movement unhurried, almost ceremonial. The vest itself was a roadmap of a life lived. Faded patches, their threads frayed by sun and time, clung to the cracked leather like old memories. Miller's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer as she scanned them. Skulls, eagles, cryptic acronyms. To her it was the ridiculous costume of an old man trying to cling to a rebellious youth he probably never had. "You think these little patches make you tough, old-timer?" she scoffed, stepping closer. The sun was hot on the asphalt of Main Street, and the air was thick with the smell of exhaust and brewing hostility. "A lot of guys like you buy these things at flea markets. Pretend you're something you're not." Silas said nothing. He simply extended his license and registration. His hand was steady, but a faint tremor, born of age and not of fear, was visible in his fingertips. Miller snatched the documents from his grasp. Her eyes scanned the license. "Silas Blackwood, 82 years old. You really think you should still be driving this thing?" Before he could answer, her attention went back to the vest. She pointed a manicured finger at a particularly worn patch over his heart, a simple shield design with letters so faded they were barely legible. "What's this one supposed to be?" "Your make-believe biker gang." A flicker of something, not anger but a deep ancient sorrow, passed through Silas's eyes. He remained silent, his jaw set. The lack of a reaction seemed to infuriate Miller more than any argument could have. She saw his quiet dignity as insolence. She saw his age as weakness. She saw his entire presence as a fraud. "You know, we have a real problem with stolen valor in this country," she said, her voice loud enough for the gathering onlookers to hear clearly. "Old men who never served a day in their lives, dressing up to get free coffee and a pat on the back. It's pathetic, and it's insulting to the real heroes." Officer Davis cleared his throat. "Miller, maybe we just write the ticket for the rolling stop and let him go on his way, pretending to be a hero." Miller shot back, not even looking at her partner. "No, I want to know who he is. I want to know if any of this," she gestured dismissively at Silas's entire being, "is real." The crowd murmured. A woman clutching a grocery bag whispered to her friend. A teenager started recording on his phone. The sense of a public shaming was palpable, a suffocating blanket of humiliation settling over the old man on the motorcycle. Silas's gaze finally lowered from the horizon and met Miller's. There was no fear in them, only a profound weariness. "Ma'am," he said, his voice raspy with disuse but calm. "There is no need for this." "Oh, I think there is," Miller said, her voice triumphant. She had finally gotten a response. "I'm going to need you to step off the bike, slowly. I want you to empty your pockets onto the hood of my patrol car. Let's see what other trinkets you've collected." The command was designed to demean, to strip him of his last vestiges of pride in front of the town. Silas swung a leg over his bike with a stiff, pained motion. Each movement was a testament to a body that had endured more than she could ever imagine. He walked toward the patrol car, his boots scuffing softly on the pavement. The crowd watched, silent and rapt, as this quiet drama of power and pride played out under the harsh midday sun. As Silas began to comply, placing a small flip phone and a set of keys on the hot metal of the hood, Officer Miller's eyes landed again on that faded patch over his heart. It was the one that seemed to bother her the most, the one that looked the oldest, the most authentic. Reaching out, she poked it with her finger, the polished nail a stark contrast to the frayed ancient fabric. "This one right here," she said, her voice a low taunt. "First of the 7th. Tough guys, huh?" The moment her finger touched the patch, the world shifted for Silas. The scent of hot asphalt was replaced by the thick, humid smell of jungle rot and cordite. The murmur of the crowd became the thumping whump 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 of Huey rotor blades beating the thick Vietnam air into submission. For a split second, he wasn't an old man on Main Street. He was a young captain, mud-caked and exhausted, shouting over the din of battle, the face of a young private barely 19, looking to him for an order, for hope, for a way to stay alive. The memory was so vivid, so total, that his breath hitched. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving behind the hollow ache of ghosts long past. He blinked, the pale blue of his eyes seeming to clear, to focus back on the sneering face of the officer in front of him. He had not made a sound, but the tiny involuntary reaction was a crack in his placid facade, a glimpse of the universe of pain he kept locked away inside. Unseen by Miller, who was now wholly absorbed in her power trip, a man at the edge of the crowd turned and walked away. His name was Mark, a former Army sergeant who ran the local diner. He was 45, with a military bearing he'd never quite lost. He'd seen enough to recognize the look in the old man's eyes. It was a look he'd seen in the mirror after his own tours overseas. It was the look of a man who had been to hell and was now being forced to endure a petty purgatory. Mark ducked into the alleyway beside the hardware store, pulling his phone from his pocket. He didn't call the local police chief. He knew this was above the chief's pay grade. He had a number he'd been given years ago by a visiting general, a just-in-case contact at the nearest major military installation, Fort Holloway. He dialed, his heart pounding with a righteous fury. A crisp, professional voice answered, "Fort Holloway Command Office." "My name is Mark Jessup," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need to speak to the base commander. It's an emergency." "Sir, the colonel is not. Just tell him it's about Silas Blackwood," Mark cut in, his voice tight. "Tell him retired Colonel Silas Blackwood is being harassed by local police on Main Street in Oak Haven. They're calling him a fraud. Please, you have to tell him, now." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a sudden shift in tone. "Stand by." Mark leaned against the brick wall, sweat trickling down his temple. He could still hear Miller's voice carrying from the street, sharp and accusatory. He prayed he wasn't too late. He had seen the way these things could spiral, how a small injustice could metastasize into a tragedy. He thought of the old man standing there with such profound, unshakable dignity in the face of such cheap humiliation, and his hands clenched into fists. Help was on the way. The cavalry had been called 40 miles away. Inside the hushed, air-conditioned command suite at Fort Holloway, Colonel David Vance took the call from his aide. Vance was a man forged in the crucible of modern warfare, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was preparing for a video conference with the Pentagon, his mind a whirlwind of logistics and strategic planning. "Sir," his aide said, holding the phone out, his eyes wide, "it's about a Colonel Silas Blackwood." Vance's entire posture changed. The slouch of a man burdened by bureaucracy vanished, replaced by the ramrod straightness of a soldier who has just heard a name that commands absolute respect. He took the phone. "Vance here." He listened for a few seconds, his expression hardening with each word. The name Silas Blackwood was not just a name, it was a legend within the ranks, a ghost, a man who had led from the front in the darkest days of the 7th Cavalry, a man whose exploits were whispered with awe by grizzled command sergeants major and taught as case studies in leadership at West Point. "Where?" Vance's voice was low, but it vibrated with a controlled fury that made his aide take an involuntary step back. He listened again. Understood. He hung up and slammed the phone down, not in a fit of pique, but with the decisive force of a man issuing an irrevocable order. "Sergeant Major," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the hallway. The base command sergeant major, a man who had seen combat in 4 different decades, appeared at the doorway almost instantly. "Sir," scrambled the honor guard. "I want them in full dress uniform. Have my command vehicle brought to the front, full flags. I want a 4-vehicle escort, MPs. We roll in 5 minutes." "Sir, what's the situation?" the sergeant major asked, already turning to relay the orders. "A living legend is being disrespected," Vance said, his voice cold as a crypt. "And we are going to remind some people what the word honor means." The quiet efficiency of the command suite exploded into a maelstrom of urgent, purposeful activity. The full weight and fury of the United States Army was being mobilized, not for a war but for the dignity of a single 82-year-old man. Back on Main Street, the drama was reaching its ugly crescendo. Silas had emptied his pockets. All that was left was his wallet. It was an old, cracked leather bifold, softened by decades of use, its edges worn smooth. He pulled it from his back pocket. "Let me see that," Miller demanded, snatching it from his hand before he could open it. She flipped it open with a flick of her wrist, expecting to find a few dollars and a dusty photo. Instead, tucked into one of the sleeves was a small, folded piece of paper. Behind it, something hard. "What's all this?" she muttered, her fingers clumsily trying to pry the contents out. As she fumbled with the worn leather, a small dark object slipped free. It fell from the wallet, glinting purple and gold in the harsh sunlight before clattering onto the asphalt with a soft metallic click. It was a heart-shaped medal, hanging from a purple ribbon. Miller glanced down at it, her expression one of utter incomprehension. "What's this? More costume jewelry? You buy this at the surplus store too?" This was her final, irrevocable step over the line. She saw the medal not as a symbol of sacrifice but as another prop in the pathetic play she had constructed in her mind. She gestured for Davis to come closer. "Get the cuffs, we're bringing him in. Obstruction, public nuisance. We'll get him a full psych evaluation while we're at it." It was at that exact moment that the sound began. It started as a distant hum, a vibration felt more than heard. It grew quickly into a low, powerful siren, a sound unlike the familiar yelp of the local police cruisers. It was a deep, resonant wail that spoke of authority and power. Everyone on the street turned. Cresting the hill at the end of Main Street was not a police car or an ambulance. It was a convoy. At the lead was a gleaming black staff car, its fenders flying the two-star flag of a major general and the colors of the United States Army. Flanked by two imposing military police SUVs, with another bringing up the rear, the procession moved with a solemn, unstoppable purpose. They didn't race, they proceeded, their presence sucking all the air and noise from the street. The convoy pulled to a smooth, synchronized stop, boxing in Miller's patrol car. The crowd, which had been murmuring and recording, fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Car doors opened in unison. From the escort vehicles, 4 military police officers in crisp uniforms emerged, their faces impassive. From a transport vehicle in the back, 6 soldiers from the Fort Holloway Honor Guard disembarked, their movements sharp, precise, their dress blues immaculate, their white gloves dazzling in the sun. Then, the passenger door of the lead staff car opened. Colonel David Vance emerged, his uniform sharply pressed, his chest a formidable gallery of ribbons and medals. He adjusted his service cap and surveyed the scene with an icy calm that was more terrifying than any rage. He completely ignored Officer Miller and her partner, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found the old man standing by the patrol car. Without a word, Colonel Vance strode forward, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement. He walked directly to Silas Blackwood. The crowd held its breath. Miller and Davis stood frozen, suddenly looking small and foolish, like children caught playing dress-up. Vance stopped one pace in front of Silas. He took in the old man's worn vest, his tired eyes and the purple medal lying forlornly on the ground. Then he drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He raised his right hand to his brow and executed the sharpest, most profound salute Catlin Miller had ever witnessed. It was a gesture of such deep, resounding respect that it seemed to physically alter the atmosphere of the street. "Colonel Blackwood, sir," Vance's voice boomed, clear and strong, cutting through the silence. "Colonel David Vance, Fort Holloway. I apologize for the delay in our arrival, sir. We came as soon as we heard." A collective gasp went through the crowd. "Colonel?" Miller's mind reeled, unable to process the word. Her smug certainty shattered into a million pieces. The old fraudulent biker was a colonel? Vance held his salute, his eyes locked on Silas's. Silas, after a moment's hesitation, gave a slight, tired nod. It was the only acknowledgement Vance needed. The colonel dropped his salute and turned, his gaze falling upon Miller and Davis for the first time. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Officer," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "do you have any idea who this man is?" Miller opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Vance didn't wait for an answer. He gestured to the dusty medal on the ground. "That costume jewelry you so carelessly dismissed is the Purple Heart, awarded to members of the armed forces who are wounded or killed in combat." His gaze flickered to Silas, then back to Miller, his voice rising with a controlled, righteous anger. "You are in the presence of retired Colonel Silas Blackwood, a distinguished graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, a man who commanded the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, in the Ia Drang Valley. He served 3 tours of duty in a war that chewed up and spit out lesser men. This man holds the Distinguished Service Cross for leading a charge that saved his entire company from being overrun. He holds 3 silver stars for gallantry, 4 bronze stars for valor." Vance took a step closer, his voice dropping again to a lethal personal level. "He was wounded in combat on 5 separate occasions. That medal on the ground is just one of the 5 he was awarded. He didn't buy it at a surplus store. He bought it with his own blood on some forgotten hillside in a country you've only read about in history books." He bent down, not with the creak of age but with the reverence of a disciple. He picked up the Purple Heart, brushed the dust from it with his thumb, and held it out to Silas on his open palm. "Your medal, sir." Silas took it, his gnarled fingers closing around it. All around them, the scene was one of frozen shock. The teenager had stopped recording, his phone hanging limply in his hand. The woman with the groceries was openly weeping. Mark, the diner owner, stood tall at the edge of the crowd, a grimly satisfied look on his face. The newly arrived town police chief, a portly man named Henderson who looked like he was about to have a heart attack, was hurrying toward them, his face pale. "Colonel Vance, Chief Henderson," the police chief stammered, arriving breathless. "I don't know what to say. I am so sorry." Vance gave him a curt nod before turning his attention back to a completely broken Officer Miller. Her face was ashen, the mirrored sunglasses now seeming like a pathetic shield. The arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked fear. "Your officer," Vance said to the chief, though his eyes never left Miller, "lacks the judgment, the character, and the basic human decency to wear a uniform that represents public trust. She chose to humiliate a citizen, an elder, and a decorated combat veteran for her own amusement." Before the chief could respond, a quiet voice interrupted. "That's enough, David." All eyes turned to Silas. He had stepped forward, the Purple Heart held loosely in his hand. He looked at Colonel Vance and then his gaze settled on the terrified young woman before him. "She's young," Silas said, his voice soft but carrying an undeniable authority. "We all make mistakes when we're young and sure of ourselves. The lesson is what matters." He looked directly at Miller, and for the first time she truly saw him. She saw the kindness beneath the weariness, the strength beneath the frailty. "The uniform you wear," he said, gesturing to her badge, "it means something. It means service and protection. The one I used to wear meant the same thing. Don't ever forget what it stands for. Don't ever mistake the power it gives you for your own." His wisdom, offered with grace instead of anger, was a more profound rebuke than any official reprimand could ever be. He had been publicly shamed, and in his moment of absolute vindication he chose mercy. As he spoke, holding the small, heart-shaped medal, the world flashed for him one last time. He wasn't on Main Street. He was lying on a cot in a sweltering field hospital, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and blood. A general with tired eyes was pinning this very medal to the rough blanket covering his chest. He could feel the phantom pain in his shoulder, the heavy exhaustion in his bones. The medal was not a trophy. It was a receipt, a tangible record of a price paid, and holding it now, in the quiet aftermath of a different kind of battle, its weight felt exactly the same. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and decisive. The video of the confrontation, eventually posted by the teenager, went viral. Officer Caitlin Miller was placed on indefinite administrative leave, her career in law enforcement effectively over. Facing immense pressure from veterans groups and a shamed public, the Oak Haven Police Department, under the personal supervision of Chief Henderson, instituted a mandatory new training protocol focused on de-escalation and respectful community interaction, with a specific module dedicated to the unique culture and sensitivities of military veterans. Chief Henderson issued a formal public apology to Colonel Blackwood, an apology that was printed on the front page of the local paper and read aloud at the next town hall meeting. Silas, for his part, wanted none of it. He politely declined every interview request and simply went back to his quiet life in the small house on the edge of town. The cavalry had come and gone, and he was content to return to the peace he had fought so hard to find. About a month later, Silas was sitting in his usual booth at Mark's diner, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. The bell over the door jingled. He glanced up and saw a young woman hesitating just inside. It was Caitlin Miller. She was out of uniform, dressed in simple jeans and a t-shirt. She looked smaller, younger, and utterly lost. Their eyes met across the room. For a long moment, she just stood there. Mark came out from behind the counter, ready to ask her to leave, but Silas gave a slight shake of his head. Miller took a deep breath and walked over to his booth. She stood by his table, wringing her hands. "Colonel Blackwood," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Sir, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. What I did, there's no excuse. It was ugly, and I was wrong. I'm so sorry." The apology was raw, unadorned, and clearly sincere. It was offered without an audience, without any hope of redemption beyond the unburdening of her own conscience. Silas looked at her for a long moment, studying her face. He saw the shame and regret warring there. He finally gave a slow, deliberate nod. "We all have our wars," he said, his voice quiet. "Some are fought in jungles. Some are fought right here." He gestured to his heart, then to hers. "Just do better." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I will," she whispered. She turned and walked quickly out of the diner, leaving Silas alone with his coffee. He took a slow sip, the bitter liquid warming him. He looked out the window at the quiet street, a man at peace, a silent guardian whose valor needed no announcement, whose honor was its own reward. Stories like Colonel Blackwood's remind us that true heroes don't seek the spotlight. They walk among us every day, their sacrifices etched into their very souls. If you were moved by this story of dignity and honor, please like this video, subscribe to Veteran Valor for more, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you next time.